Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy. This book was a pleasant surprise. I vaguely remember seeing this edition of the book sometime during my public school years. Probably it was presented to me as a possible reading assignment in an English class. I found this copy among the science fiction paperbacks at Gardner's Books in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This edition was published by Signet Classics in August of 1960. Is it science fiction? The protagonist, Julian West, is placed in a hypnotic trance in 1887 and wakes up in the year 2000 when his sleeping chamber is uncovered by a construction crew. At the very least, it involves suspended animation, and the circumstances of the novel could certainly be compared to time travel. Looking Backward may be largely forgotten today outside of academic circles, but according to some online sources, it was among the top 3 best-selling novels of the 19th century. Edward Bellamy was raised in a family of Christian ministers and was an activist for social reform. The Industrial Revolution had brought great riches to the United States, but it also created a new class of slum dwellers living in deplorable conditions in America's largest cities. Bellamy was horrified by man's inhumanity to man and actively sought to educate and involve people in the task of changing the status quo. The United States, South America, and Europe of the year 2000, as envisioned by Edward Bellamy, is a world in which all are equally provided for and the government is the sole capitalist, providing employment and goods to all in a system that allows for individual preference and aptitude but punishes no one as less than any other. It is a technological utopia. Among Bellamy's correct predictions are radio, TV, and credit cards. He failed to take into account how quickly language evolves in common usage, so the people who populate the year 2000 sound a lot like characters from a novel by Charles Dickens. He states that fashions and clothing have not changed much. How could he have possibly envisioned the variety of clothing we see on the streets of America, or the piercings, tattoos, purple hair, and other desperate attempts to establish individuality? We don't live in a utopia, but utopia was a popular notion in the minds of late 19th century social reformers. They saw that the robber barons were amassing phenomenal wealth, but with the exception of Carnegie, pretty much turned a blind eye to the conditions suffered by the lower classes. This was just a carryover from medieval Europe when nobility owned everything and the serfs owned nothing. Wasn't America supposed to be different? Those concerned citizens of the 1880s would surely be appalled to see today's concentration of wealth in the hands of so few. A report I watched yesterday predicted that Elon Musk will have a monopoly on energy by the year 2030, not just in the Western world, but conceivably worldwide. Bellamy's Looking Backward is said to have influenced more than 10 utopian novels and most certainly had an impact on H.G. Wells' dystopian novel, When the Sleeper Wakes. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that Edgar Rice Burroughs borrowed from Bellamy in creating his John Carter stories, and of course Buck Rogers has similar elements. My edition of Looking Backward contains an extensive foreword by Erich Fromm. If you've done much reading in psychology, philosophy, or social reform in the mid-20th century, you've certainly heard the name Erich Fromm. Fromm was a democratic socialist and very interested in the impact this novel had on society. Looking Backward struck a nerve in America's populace, and over 160 clubs sprang up all over the country in which concerned citizens brainstormed about ways to make some of Bellamy's ideas a reality. The novel is well written, and I read it in a couple of sittings. But if you do not enjoy Dickens or other 19th century novelists, the language may seem a bit overwrought. I cut my literary teeth on Edgar Allan Poe, so I felt right at home with Bellamy's literary style. This book can be enjoyed as entertainment, but it clearly exists to stimulate thought. What is possible for humanity? Is there such a diversity in intelligence and aggression that the majority are doomed to be the de facto slaves of the elite? How would you answer that question? One of the findings of psychologists is the fact that people who acquire wealth quickly develop a sense that they are rich because they deserve to be rich. Conversely, others are poor because they are weak-willed and lazy. Is this a flaw in human nature? How do you feel about the idea? Bellamy's book is good for stimulating thought, even today. As I was reading the book, I found myself thinking, I hope this doesn't all turn out to be a dream, like with Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. I was so disappointed when near the end of the book, Julian West wakes up in his original timeline and is attacked by friends when he tries to educate them on the ideas implemented in the future utopia. Happily, Bellamy creates a double twist ending, and West wakes up once more in the utopia, his ugly visit to the ignorance of the 19th century having been a nightmare. West is so happy to be back in the year 2000 and weeps, feeling himself unworthy to be reaping the benefits of the system he had no hand in creating. Many of the books I read and review for this channel are just literary fluff, a way to entertain myself for a few hours. Often I remember little about them after a few weeks have passed. Looking back, on the other hand, has left an indelible mark on my consciousness. I won't forget this book, and I feel sure I'll think of it often in the years to come. Bellamy was not a writer who attempted to predict the future, as Jules Verne is often considered to be. He was more like a voice crying in the wilderness, awakening humanity to a possibility that lay outside their baser appetites, beyond their greed and lust for power. Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy. So glad I found this book, tucked in the science fiction section between Ballard and Burroughs. If you have the chance, check it out. If you like what you're finding on this channel, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment.